Rightio guys, I've procrastinated on this for far too long. You see the title there, Comprehensive Guide to Unfucking House Prices. I've started it as a series, A Complete Betrayal. This will be episode 1. I'll get into why it is a complete betrayal later on in the video. Don't mind the poor production quality, I'm just recording this in the car. But nonetheless, let's just get straight into it. Your thoughts, leave your insight and feedback in the comments. I will read them. Preferably constructive criticism about the topic at hand. But yeah, happy to take on anything you guys have to say, honestly. Future video topic suggestions. Australia, as it's probably relevant and easier for me, but more so it needs to be actionable and conclusive rather than just open-ended rants. And yeah, without the woke stuff, preferably. Thank you. Disclaimers: this will include discussion and commentary on immigration. When raising concerns on or being critical of immigration, we are told this is racist. Just as raising concerns regarding vaccine safety is anti-vax, anti-science. Celebration of obesity is fat-phobic. Criticizing Islam's lack of cohesion in Christian nations is Islamophobic. Jewish media ownership and Jewish banking dynasties is anti-Semitic. Criticizing behavior of women is sexist. The single mother epidemic, that would be sexist. Criticizing the celebration of aborting healthy babies is misogynistic. Criticizing the state of education, or more so indoctrination, is being against teachers. Criticising welfare disability spending here in Australia, that's the NDIS, or what is referred to as the disability economy, is ableist. Criticising great replacement, demographic destiny, immigration vote is white supremacist. Criticising the unions under the table deals is being a corporate sellout. Criticising monopolies is being a communist. Criticising media's biased coverage or lack of coverage on significant events like pandemics, wars, and, quote, terrorist attacks is conspiracy theorising. Criticising forever wars or the war economy is treachery. And criticising homosexuals is homophobic. In reality, these concerns are entirely relevant and fair and are not grounds for the above titles. These catchwords are merely smear labels to discredit, delegitimise, and undermine, that are used by those unwilling to enter nuanced debate for reasons maybe yet to be uncovered. Now, granted, nuance is used by both sides to make absolute cases. For example, elective abortion of healthy babies that do not put the mother at risk during delivery, pro-choice, must be available to all women at all times without exception because, quote, what about rape and incest? Now, obviously, these are rare instances. We'll go on from here. Why am I making this video? Because my grandma said I wouldn't do anything about it, and my uncle said I would be pissing into the wind in trying to make a difference. I wish this was a joke, but it's not. That's what's pushed me to make it. I believe it's important for the next generations, not just us currently. So a couple of recent quotes I stumbled upon in the last few months. At some point, you'll have to stop running and take a stand. Either you, your children, or your grandchildren. Better you than them. Another one. Society grows great when men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So if I can change the attitude and the mindset, and therefore the vote of one person based on this information, that is one small step, and a step in the right direction, hopefully many more to come. I'd say knowing is half the battle. So we've waited for the so-called experts to solve the problem for too long. Instead, it is clear it will take fellow citizens to raise awareness on the matters, for the people to then vote for well-regarded or incorruptible representatives into Parliament to pass legislation for real change and not band-aid fixes. Myself, I'm not an expert, economist or the like. I've just tried paying attention. Who is this for? Non-homeowners and homeowners alike, grandparents, parents and children, those young people that want to become parents in the near future. People who love their family and supposedly want the best for the next generation. Noting that there are now some families who consider relocating overseas for better economic opportunities. This has come full circle when you consider the inception of Australia was just that. Who this is not for, addressing common rebuts. You'll hear it's all relative, or they didn't earn as much back then. So this is false, no basis in the numbers. I've read that roughly in the 1990s, it was median house price to median income was 3 times. It's nearing 14 times in current day. I've put an asterisk there because obviously it depends on what data you're willing to ignore. Another one, it's hard to compare, or it was a different time. This is a cop-out, non-answer in my opinion, or fence sitting or cope, any of your choice. Another one, there isn't much you can do. You have to take what you can get. This is despair or weakness. The next one, don't worry about it. You've just got to enjoy life and make the most of it. Or, well, I've had a great life, and life is what you make it. This is dismissive, an all well and good attitude that doesn't affect change. I'd say large part of the boomer generation can be summarised sort of by these quotes here. These people may take the form of family members, as in my own case. Simply put, they won't be a part of the solution. A quick problem-solving exercise, pretty boring, I know, but I think it is important to establish this up front. So is there a problem, and how to determine? If you believe yes, you need to substantiate it. Quantify the extent of the problem. Numbers are harder to discredit than commentary. Anecdotal evidence rarely suffices despite the weight it should hold. You will very often see statistics, studies and surveys targeted by bad actors in corruption, almost always those with interest, financial or otherwise, in delegitimizing, therefore not resolving said problem. Preferably no light gets shone on it at all via media suppression. Identify through research why problem exists, in brackets what caused it, the trends/correlation, then plan a solution and execute based on research to undo and revert the factors that caused it. Extrapolate larger knock-on spillover effects should it not be addressed, social/family issues. Observation. Now this might offend some, so I might lose some viewers here, but that's fine. Observation. Emotional arguments work on women and feminine men, as long as it stirs emotion for the sake of other women and the children. Women and feminine men are impervious, however, to emotional arguments made on behalf of the plight of masculine traditional men. As such, these men are not the beneficiaries of emotional arguments, which in part explains why they do not fall for emotional arguments themselves. Knowing this, it is best you address the effect the ongoing problem will have on women and children. Obviously, women are 50% of the population, thus 50% of the voters. So, is there a problem? If you believe no, you can either ignore or you can research as above. Important, you have to be open to having your mind changed. Ignorance is bliss. There's a lot of generations in this camp. Remember actions over words. If they say they care, where are the fruits, results, and receipts? If you believe yes and are told no, or if you believe no and are told yes, this is a conflict designed to make you fold. You have your own decision to make. Research directly or indirectly, i.e. indirectly would be you can ask someone you trust who may be better educated on the matter and explain it to you for you to come to your own conclusion. So research directly or indirectly to reinforce or change your view. You can change your opinion when the facts change. Self-education above all. You will not learn if you're not seeking the information. If you believe no and are told no, this is what we call one more happy camper. If you believe yes and are told yes, from current media coverage regarding house prices and cost of living, if you're told yes, why has nothing been done about it? Look at the incentives for change versus no change. If you're told yes, but that, quote, nothing can be done about it. Again, look at incentives. Now, who is telling you? This is mainstream media, show hosts reading off their teleprompters. This is the government via their government media releases. This is the big banks, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, so-called experts. What do they have to gain? Applies more than just house prices. This is pharma, gambling, and war. The problem, well, you already know the problem. That's why you're here. A must-watch. Matt Barry put another Aussie on the Barbie keynote. You can find it on YouTube and Twitter. I've watched this multiple times. I suggest you do the same. I'll use some of his statistics, but my own summary of the problem. House prices and rent as a relative measure to median household income have been rising significantly over decades. Importantly, not in line with wage growth, and certainly not in line with real wage growth. Real wage growth being wage growth minus inflation, an important distinction. Percentage of households in mortgage or rent stress, definition of that being 30% or more of gross income allocated to mortgage repayments or rent. So percentage of households in mortgage rent stress is becoming dangerously high, totaling 70% of renters and 50% of mortgage holders. Large homeless tent cities already appearing in Brisbane, mainstream media largely not to cover it. As a result of this higher percentage of income allocated, overall quality of life is being affected, mental, psychological stress. Households are cutting out important leisure and entertainment as a family and rarely take time off work. The less time they spend with their kids, the more time the kids spend in school and outside school care. This is the indoctrination state-raised kids. Parents working second and even third jobs, evenings and weekends, which burn them out. Households are cutting out healthcare, checkups, heating and cooling their home, electricity, hot showers, meals, clothes, you name it. Buyers who want to enter the market in something comparable to what their parents did at a similar respective age cannot come up with the necessary amount for the deposit, leading to their parents giving equity to their children through second mortgage gifted deposits or guarantee loans. This is fake wealth. 47 years to save a 20% deposit for a median detached house in Sydney. That's assuming as at today price with no growth over that 47-year period. Those who are renting cannot save for a deposit because of the high percentage of income allocated to rent. With assessment rates, now an assessment rate is essentially an advertised interest rate plus a 3% buffer. With assessment rates nearing 10%, couples do not have high enough income to afford the necessary remaining loan amount in purchasing the house they want. When a couple have a child and the mother must take extended leave, they will either 1. Have to continue to rent, obviously if not owning already, and the same problem arises, not saving for the deposit and not enough combined income to get the necessary home loan. While renting, house prices will continue to increase at a higher rate than their own savings, putting them further behind. Number 2, they fall behind in their mortgage due to reduced household income, putting them into financial stress with the ultimatum of selling and having to rent and re-enter the buying market at a higher price. This would incur sales fees and stamp duty on the way out and back in. Young parents send their child to daycare as soon as possible, continuing to keep them in after-school care through primary school ages, the plan of the communists. One of the many tragedies of modern time. Couples are delaying when they have children because of these points. Adults are living with their parents into their 30s, years which husbands should have been working, providing for his stay-at-home wife and children. So what's the cause? Well, before the cause, let us preface the phrasing and the framing is important. We hear real estate, we hear property. It is merely shelter, a roof over your head. Note, I will not be using the term housing as it's been quite muddled. So this is one versus the other. We hear real estate and property. It's a market versus shelter, a necessity. We obviously need to move back towards a necessity. Quick caveat, a market being where a skilled person completes a task, in this case to build shelter, for others who are not in that way skilled, for an amount over raw material cost or profit, poses no case of inherent immorality from the selling party. This is the basis of exchange and the value of labour. The issue arises in a monopoly, and now more on monopolies in another slide. The issue arises in a monopoly, wherein groups who control operations and oversee, now oversee in this context means subcontract, and I'm obviously referring to developers here, wherein groups who control operations and oversee the as mentioned skilled completing the tasks, charging an excessive amount over cost with which the context has been removed from said market. And again, if that seems convoluted, I'll get into monopolies later. One versus the other. An asset, an investment, which is speculative, versus a home, a space to raise your family. Now, quickly, the nest egg myth, a house as your biggest investment. You can downsize into retirement from a large home with land to a lower maintenance dwelling in a scenario where the houses are $100,000 and a townhouse of $40,000. It does not need to be $5 million for a house and $2 million for a townhouse. The cost of your house, on paper, does not need to be your livelihood. Again, one versus the other. A security being an asset, for banks and lenders, their diversification, versus your labour in physical form. Interestingly, if you look at the history of usury, which is lending money at interest, money lenders, landlords have been expelled in past times. The medieval slave class, where they were given food and shelter for their work, but nothing more, translates to the modern day slave class, working 50 years to pay off the debt on their shelter, essentially renting. The fractional reserves, we'll get into this on another slide. Okay, and if there is a problem, but it has been allowed to go on unaddressed, who benefits? Look at the incentives. Charlie Munger quote, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." So firstly, the supposed government. Now I say supposed because of the below. We could very well talk about a global government, but the supposed government, the uni party, Liberal and Labor. Their revenue streams, stamp duty. Stamp duty is on the purchase price based on the valuation. Council rates and land tax based on valuation. Capital gains tax on the sale of an investment property, which is obviously based on the sale price. Income tax on rental income from investment property. Generally, rental yields remain constant, thus rental amount increases with the increase in house prices and asset prices. Another positive for the government for this to be unaddressed is, on paper, household net worth grows in the run-up to elections, helps shape sentiment. This is merely fake growth, but you'll hear, "We were doing well under so-and-so, my house price doubled." If it's gone unaddressed, who benefits? The banks and the lenders, obviously. Remember that its interest rates don't drive their outsized returns. Dollars lent and loan term do. So the greater the value of your property, the greater they can lend. This is interest over the life of the loan, an important distinction. Dollars lent based on valuation, typically 80% loan to value ratio. Affordability buffer is at 3%. Chief executives at the big banks and lenders, in their genius, want this reduced to 2% or even 1%, while increasing loan terms from 30 to 40 or to even 50 years. So by law, the banks and lenders must be as profitable as possible. Naturally, price gouging. Naturally, they're optimizing for how much money they can lend you. We've got a bank here in Australia, the National Australia Bank. Their catchphrase is "more than money," which is quite comical. If the problem has been allowed to go unaddressed, who benefits? Property developers, this is self-explanatory. Mortgage brokers and real estate agents, they're paid a commission on the loan amount written and sale price respectively. Superannuation funds, they hold substantial percentage of their investments in Australian banks and lenders. Thus, part of the fund's performance is tied to the bank's performance. We explained that the bank's performance is tied to the amount of money they can lend you at interest, and the amount of money they can lend you is based on the valuation. This money lent is largely all concentrated in residential mortgages. More profit for the banks, more profit for the funds. You do the math. Property owners benefit from psychological easing, feel like they're faring better than they are, but this is paper net worth. Note, you would need to re-enter in the same market upon sale. All employees with superannuation. As mentioned, super fund performance partly tied to banks' profits. Higher house prices, more money lent at interest, more profit for the banks, more profit for the funds, more profit for you. Now, the global government, we could do this in another episode. The problem being the industry of bankers, developers, super funds, etc. have huge influence in Parliament via their relationships, which are merely transactional, and donations or bribes to the uni party. This will be very hard to overcome. Alright, what caused the problem? Frankly, us. We caused the problem. If you're not of voting age, then your parents and grandparents. We vote in the government under the bold assumption the elections are legitimate to manage the country, so it falls on us. We've continued to vote in mass for the Liberal Labor Uni Party, despite the problem being evident decades ago. A problem that arose under them, what should be their watchful eyes. Always take responsibility, but know that personal responsibility is kryptonite for those who want big government to solve their problems. The victim mentality. Communists eat these people for breakfast. Pointing the blame does not remove the consequence or change the reality. Yes, poor management from the uni party. But a fact is that the players operate within the rules laid out by the uni party. The players being banks, developers, real estate agents, mortgage brokers. They operate within the rules laid out by the uni party. Yes, illegal activity appears despite the rules. As my auntie told me, don't hate the player, hate the game. Other simple measurable factors. The amount of money people can spend on buying. This is the ability to borrow or debt. This is the RBA, the banks, the lenders, the regulators. Another factor, amount of money people are willing to spend. The culture. This falls on the people. Number of houses/dwellings, in brackets development. This is the developers, the builders, the council approvals. Number of people/buyers/renters. This is immigration and foreign buyers. This falls on the government. Firstly, amount of money people can spend on buying, the money supply. This is fundamental. It does not only drive house prices, but everything else just the same. Fractional reserve banking. So essentially, they're lending multiple times the deposits they hold in their bank. This is money out of thin air. And a fun fact being, countries in old times, goldsmiths, essentially people who stored the gold and gave out gold receipts. Goldsmiths found issuing more receipts for gold than gold deposits would be executed or exiled. Some food for thought. The RBA, the Royal Bank of Australia, Reserve Bank of Australia, my apologies. RBA money printing, money out of thin air, enables government spending via exorbitant welfare and overquoted infrastructure projects, for example, in excess of revenue. As a result, 890 billion national debt currently. The money has to go somewhere or to be taken from somewhere. Our buying power. RBA cash rates sitting at a historical low from 2013 through 2022, a false signal to borrow. In the past, higher LVR and lower assessment criteria since have been tightened, however, pressures to reduce once again. All supposed fixes introduced, the first homeowners grant, stamp duty relief, low deposit loans, home start, shared equity, lenders' mortgage insurance, etc., trying to treat the symptom, not addressing the cause, merely boost demand and get people that can't really afford the shelter to be able to purchase. My apologies, a typo there. Amount of money people are willing to spend. Part 1. We have a housing culture. News coverage assists in programming the minds and propping up house prices. We take pride in the cost of our shelter, maybe a natural human desire, and shelter neighbouring our own. We hold prestige in the name of the suburbs, name brand suburbs. Oh, I live in XYZ. Truthfully, suburbs are merely a collection of people's shelter. The real importance of the name of the suburb is what those people represent, which is power and prestige, a higher class of people. These are politicians, barristers, lawyers, bankers, finance bigwigs, surgeons, or other specialized medical practitioners, well-established business owners, etc. Side note, expensive historic schools being old money, have a very direct role to play in suburbs. Again, what do the parents of these fellow pupils represent? We view lack of prestige in other suburbs. Quote, oh, I would never live in XYZ. What they mean to say is, I don't want to live alongside those people that don't represent power and prestige, a lower class of people. This suburb may very well be better suited to their earnings, but they will instead overextend to get into more prestigious area. This is class warfare keeping up with the Joneses. We have a debt culture, incessant news coverage on the latest banking policy legislation allowing people to borrow more money against their home value. Banks stuff interest rates down our throats through mass advertising on TV, social media, and billboards and bus stops. Credit cards get sent in the mail as soon as you turn 18. This is not an accident, this is programming. They know exactly the return on ad spend they will get. A quote, a future where people consider themselves lucky to be burdened by an almost unserviceable debt for a majority of their working lives simply to have a place to call home. Debt culture, usury, a sin in the eyes of most all religion. Take Christianity in this case. We are no longer a Christian country, nor America, nor Canada, New Zealand, the UK, all countries that have money lending, therefore house prices out the wazoo. In the last 50 years or so, those in powerful places in banking and government are largely not religious and do not believe in judgment from a higher power for their immoral and sinful practices. The word mortgage is French, which translates to death pledge. People's willingness to spend other people's money, you can think in the case of an insurance claim in a car crash, for example. Unfortunately, they can't make the same connection that the money they borrow from the bank, although not theirs, they will need to pay back plus interest from money earned, which is their money. Amount of money people are willing to spend, part 2. Back to personal responsibility. As hard as it is to come to terms with, and the temptation to point all the blame at external factors, it is true that no one is forcing you to bid the highest offer. Yes, the prices are what they are, but there are always lower priced options, although of course it will not be what you wanted in an ideal life. We are living in far from an ideal country, as you would well be aware of. We talk of delayed gratification. Tough times create strong men. This does not absolve the government of their mismanagement. Hypocritical money experts go on shows for simpletons like Sunrise, talking about financial discipline. How rich? Significant percentage of people on public payroll are not required, but the government want to lecture people on not letting their household costs blow out from unnecessary spending. Another factor, the number of buyers and renters. Huge population increase over the last 20 years as a relative measure to baseline. We're not just talking percentages in the sense of 2% on 20 million, 25 million. is far from 2% on a couple million. I hope you guys can understand that. Now, number of buyers and renters, this is purely immigration. Birth rate for Australians is below the necessary replacement rate to replace both the mother and father. This is roughly 2.1. Thus, no additional buyers or renters are coming through the next generation as the elderly Australian pass on. The additional buyers and renters are completely driven from immigration. So the number of dwellings, part 1. Preface, we have proven through our actions we are largely, as a society and culture, will not bend the knee to living in apartments if it means a more affordable purchase or rent price. We, as in Australians, would rather a non-apartment that is less affordable or unaffordable. An emphasis, this is of course not a fault, just a reality. Therefore, it is not just about the number of dwellings, but the type of dwellings. Apartments are more often occupied by migrants who are accustomed to the standards. Take, for example, in high population, dense regions like Tokyo, Japan, the residents live in apartments. Their apartments, being in large supply, along with other factors, are much more affordable as a relation to household income compared to major Australian cities, for example. The Japanese would all want to live in a large detached house, but naturally the inner city houses that do come up for sale are for a very high price out of their budget. Culturally and socially, the Japanese have shown they will make this compromise or sacrifice, with affordability being one of the main reasons. Now, largest developers lobby the uni party through political donations or bribes to maintain monopoly over the industry. We have countless cases of developers being gifted public land for private development under the assumption that a percentage would be allocated to affordable housing that often doesn't come to fruition, or otherwise public land sold to developers at unreasonably low prices. Developers are land banking. Land banking is purposefully postponing commencement or staggering of new projects to reduce stock for sale at any one time, thus artificially pushing up each stage of each project up in price. Land banking is happening despite what they might want to say. They have 100 years of stock, a lot of this already purchased via option contracts from farmers. Developers are colluding to hold supply hostage. These are publicly listed stocks, not mum and dad small-time developers, so just remember that. A caveat, the NIMBY movement, not in my backyard, boomers and Gen X. These are the people you will see attend council meetings to fight proposed low and medium density developments. These are your townhouses, terraces, sometimes 4-story apartments in their neighbourhood. Unfortunately, the Australians who want to enter into the given suburb at a lower price compared to a detached house may not get the opportunity where the NIMBYs are successful. The NIMBYs' attitude is that they have earned it, so they shouldn't be subjected to these changes. That is fine, however incongruent with the, quote, wanting the best for the next generation. They will say it will, quote, change the character and dynamic of the neighbourhood. More on this. A red pill to swallow. More density equals more dwellings equals a lower price equals lower income buyers in the eyes of the rich are poor people. The rich people want distance from the poor do not behave like the rich. This is social etiquette. The poor are more likely to commit crime, home invasions, car theft, vandalism, etc. When they say character, it is not just about crime, however. This ties into cultural differences, as the higher density apartments and complexes more often will be occupied by the Indian, Middle Eastern and Chinese immigrants who aren't socially cohesive with the surrounding Australian-born suburb. Number of dwellings, part 2. We have an over-concentration in the established metro cities. This is just a fact. Example, America's population is better distributed, which sees lower population towns within the inner country states with lower house prices than that of New York, Chicago and Los Angeles. Australia, on the other hand, has very little in the way of developed towns outside the major cities. I'm of course not suggesting the quote 20-minute cities as people fear from the World Economic Forum, although these are valid concerns. Our cities with infinite urban sprawl is not ideal, noting people aren't enjoying a good quality of life where they have to commute 3+ hour round trip every day for work or school. The outskirt estates do not have employment opportunities, or what are called job hubs, in close proximity. So ask yourself, where does it end? Seriously. So we've laid out the factors. That means we do not increase the amount of money people can spend. This is done via policy and regulation. We do not increase the amount of money people are willing to spend. This is via education. We do not increase the number of people. This is policy on immigration. And we increase the number of dwellings that people want to buy. This is initiative. This is action. Now, put an asterisk there, and we'll get into that later. Solutions: ripping off the band-aid. Enforce proper practices to re-establish trust in federal and state elections. We shut down the Reserve Bank of Australia. We halt immigration. We ban foreign ownership. We ban large corporate ownership. We part or wholly nationalise the mining, minerals and resource sector. More on this later. We introduce a government-backed public property developer, as per Max from the Greens. He explains it well. We reduce red tape, staff more people to quickly process development planning once that government-backed property developer is put in place. We introduce government-backed interest-free loans. We go back to one-to-one reserves for banks, which is one-to-one deposits held versus money lent out. Tax reform: we abolish negative gearing and the 50% capital gains tax discount. Elections: quite seriously, who voted for Albanese and who voted for Morrison? I would like the 2022 election retallied. Did anyone really think Albanese was the answer? Which leads us to who is going to vote for Dutton in 2025, and do they really think Dutton is the answer? The RBA, this is fundamental. No more printing of money. This will stop the continual debasement of the currency, which has pushed goods and services, inflation, and so-called asset prices, including property, up. This is not capitalism as we know it. Asset prices going up. This is a debasement of the currency. The government will have to manage spending and revenue to maintain an ongoing annual surplus. Any excessive reduction in expenditure, reduction in welfare or NDIS or age pension, unemployment, etc., or infrastructure, or increase in taxation would in principle reduce net available income for the average household, thus reduce spending, and would not further contribute to inflation. A GDP per capita recession could take place. An asterisk here, as I'm not entirely sure on that. But this is not as bad as it sounds in the news. They use this as fear-mongering to ensure nothing gets done about addressing huge inflation. There's a negative relationship. We talk of correlation equals causation between interest rates and gold price. Lowering rates is a signal to borrow, which overinflates so-called asset prices. In turn, that is a signal to hedge against such inflation, or inflation being the debasement of the dollar. So a signal to hedge against it by buying gold. Similarly, there's a positive relationship between national debt, which is money we owe ourselves, that's debasement of the currency, a positive relationship between national debt and gold price. So again, this is a relationship between the debasement and the hedge. Gold is the measure of the buying power. Debasement of the dollar as a measure by gold represented in the rise in so-called house prices. This is not an increase in house prices, rather a fall in buying power. This is fundamental. You need to understand this. Again, refer to Matt Barry's video. Money printing, national debt, interest rates, inflation, asset prices, gold price are all connected. If you can really dive into this, you'll be much better off. Immigration, touchy subject, but here we go. 737,000 arrivals in the 2023 financial year. This is not including active temporary visas, student and working. This is what they're telling us. It could very well be much more. We already see they will remove ethnicity from the next census. If you understand the slippery slope theory, at some stage, why don't they just stop tracking immigration completely and just make up the numbers? That's if they haven't already. Immigration, this started with the Howard government and continued thereafter. This is a joint effort from both major parties and did not just start with Albanese, but it has undoubtedly been exacerbated, however. Those on student visas, it is said around 700,000 active, contribute to cost of shelter. Technically, they're not meant to own property, but often family overseas are buying in their name, and the so-called student here in Australia will work a full-time job to pay for the property's ongoing holding costs, posing as a tenant. If these students do not finish their degree, I do not believe they're deported, essentially then a permanent resident working full-time, which by definition not a student studying on a visa. These students who work full-time send money back to family overseas. If they do not live in a home they or their family own, they will be renting, increasing demand, pushing up the cost of rent. The student visa holders working full-time is not inherently wrong, but then it is the case that we should class them as permanent arrivals, not temporary students, as they are obviously not here for education, rather they are here for working opportunities and quality of life, meaning the 700,000 is more like 1.4 million arrivals. Immigration's social impact is as great, if not greater, in severity and seriousness than the economic and infrastructure impact. It is not the case that Australia, as we once knew, was ever multicultural. It was, however, multinational in that we had strong numbers come over from Italy, Greece, and other parts of Europe, Germany, and Yugoslavia. Australia, as we knew it, was one culture, but we have since simply imported other nationalities and ethnicities who do not share our culture, thus bringing their own and segregating themselves within our country. This is not multiculturalism. They have tried and keep trying to sell us this lie in the news and the media. The economic and infrastructure impact cannot be ignored in 2024. We have congestion, the medical centres and services are beyond capacity. So this is obvious unless you watch Channel 7 or 9, of course. This is the mushroom treatment. Foreign ownership. This is self-explanatory. The stats are there, stats that they tend to misrepresent when pressed on the matter. It is a contributing factor, full stop. Why would politicians be against banning this? You have to look at the incentives. Where does their loyalty lie? There in the title of the video and the series, a complete betrayal. We have globalists in the uni party in both houses of our government, and there in the name of the channel or my profile, they have a foreign allegiance. We only need domestic allegiance. Corporate ownership, think BlackRock. Extrapolate, the writing is on the wall, wealth divide is ever growing. The have and the have-nots. Small business, for example, has been ruined, consolidating market share, further empowering large corporates. A thought, what happens when one or two companies, Amazon or otherwise, sell every single product and offer every service and acquire or squeeze out all other competitors in the market? They would then look to consolidate ownership of property. This is farming, agricultural, industrial, commercial, retail, and then residential. Where would they stop? With control of all the market, they can suppress wages as the only employer, a mass slave population, more so then than now. What would the fate look like for a necessity like shelter or food and water once they have control over builders, farmers, the water reservoirs, and more importantly, your wages? This is corporate communism. Trading companies have no business holding shelter as their, quote, stock. Caveat, this differs from wealthy individuals who use proprietary limited companies and trusts. This is a law and accounting common practice, to buy their homes and holiday homes for protection from litigation. These entities are passive holding and not trading. Natural resources. The government need tangible financial interest, i.e. ownership. The industry players historically and still currently pay very little in royalties and often declare nil profit come tax time. Increasing corporate tax is a non-solution. It could be 99%. However, our accounting principles or loopholes enable the practice of profit minimization or tax avoidance. They are pillaging the only thing the country itself can realistically sell to other countries to generate revenue. Yes, farmers can sell their produce, businesses can sell their products and services, but these aren't governments to control. This is private enterprise. Instead of giving over to native title for the land to be left dormant, the nation's people should profit from these ventures via government ownership. Over time, ideally abolishing most all of the taxes or wage theft we face. A public property developer. So the asterisk is because currently Australian-born women's birth rate is less than 2.1. This is below replacement rate. Thus, there is no additional demand for houses from them, from the population, the native Australian population. Only demand comes from immigrants whose birth rate is generally higher than 2.1. The public property developer would still play a role when the birth rate of Australian-born women increase beyond replacement, thus need for greater number of dwellings. So more births is all that we can hope for at this stage. We would allocate some of the revenue collected from national resources towards this. Max from the Greens explains it well. I will say, when the Greens are making the most sense, outspoken on an issue, you know the Uni Party are trying their best to bury it and not address it. The public property developer floods the market with at-cost stock. This is a first in best dressed, subject to affordability, more in a later slide. As part of the development, non-market purpose-built rentals will be included. Renting at cost, so at cost of land acquisition plus construction costs and any ongoing items. There's a video on YouTube, About Here is the channel, talks of non-market housing, worth watching. When built en masse, it can assist in curbing the stigma. Examples of this in Europe. Social segregation can reduce as a result, and the well-off can live alongside the modest when done right. The social cohesion is not just determined by class or wealth, but also culture, generally meaning race, which is an immigration issue. A quick thought experiment in relation to the public property developer. Competitive market versus monopoly. A monopoly is no market. A competitive market, 10 stalls in a local market, all 10 compete for market share percentage of sale. Assuming at baseline the product and service is close to the same, if any one of 10 stalls reduce their prices to gain more market share, the remaining 9 would need to either 1. Reduce their prices also, or 2. Improve their product and service to justify maintaining the price as is. Assume all other 9 reduce their price to regain lost market share. This could repeat over and over until profit margins are too thin that the business is not greatly profitable. Peter Thiel talks about this in Competition is for Losers and his book 0 to 1. It's an interesting concept worth familiarising with. So that's a competitive market versus a monopoly. There are 10 stalls, are reduced through COVID, for example, to a few stalls in a local market. They can collude to inflate prices, thus making the few remaining stalls very profitable instead of ruthlessly competing for market share, which would include undercutting on prices. In the case of one stall, they can set the price as high as they want. So in reference to if there's a few stalls in a market, you can think of grocery chains. In Australia, we have Woolworths and Coles on the hot seat for, price gouging. So that's an obvious example that can come to mind. Competitors who try to enter this market will either need to, one, offer a superior product for the same price. This requires very high upfront cost in research and development. Think of how much money has been sunk into a Tesla, for example, the company, to break into the car market. Or two, offer a similar product for a lower price. Problem being, when offering a product for a lower price against monopolies and duopolies, etc., can reduce their margins, running at a loss over a short period of time to drive out local competitors. You can think of Amazon. This is a rinse and repeat process once they reach a big enough size. Mum and dad shops cannot run at a loss for any extended period of time. Interest-free loans, no more usury. History repeating itself. Names like Julius Caesar in the Roman Empire, King Henry in England, King Edward in England, Hitler in 1920s, Gaddafi in Libya, all things they had in common, they wanted to abolish lending money at interest. We would also abolish stamp duty on purchase, not to mention council rates and other house-related fees. Offer loans from revenue generated via resources and tax reform with no interest, starting at 100% loan to value over a 20-year loan term, reducing by 5% LVR, and 1 year loan term every year following. This is an example. The numbers could vary, rather the mechanics are the emphasis here. The affordability calculation would be principal payments capped at 30% of total gross, which is pre-tax income. This can be a single or a couple. For example, 100k single income, 30% is 30,000 times 20 years is a $600,000 purchase, and they can get 100% of this for a loan. Over the first 4 years, this would see the buyer's loan amount reduced to $480,000. That's the original buyer, and a new buyer, assuming the same 100,000 income, borrowing capped at 80%, because the 5 years for every year, 5 times 4 years is 20% reduction from the original 100%, requiring a 20% deposit of 120,000, and over a loan term now 16 years, reduced by 4 years from the original 20. Again, on an income of 100,000, 30% is 30,000 times 16 years is 480,000. A loan at 80% LVR is a purchase price of 600,000. This would ensure house prices do not continue to rise at the rate they are, without even factoring the public property developer builder and their new completions coming to market at cost. If you want me to go into more detail on this policy, I can break that out in another video. Re-establish one-to-one reserves, no more fractional reserve banking. Stop the bank's wild profitability off of intangible money, i.e. money that does not exist in deposits. Revert to what they should be. They bank or hold on to our money and invest elsewhere, not investing money that they have created out of thin air. The banking cartel will have individuals, this could be in the form of a political candidate, character assassinated or otherwise physically assassinated over a policy like this. It is said that Gaddafi had substantial gold reserves in Libya, which the US wanted to ensure the US dollar was not undermined as international reserve currency, a currency which they have had unrelentingly debased since taking the US dollar off the gold standard under Nixon in 1971. The total money made via interest, the interest is money which is realer than the debt you are paying back. The total money made via interest across the country is so astronomical, average people struggle to come to terms with what is at stake for banking when you threaten to shut down this practice. Like all other possibilities for incredible riches, think war, pharma, gambling, drug smuggling, pornography, prostitution, child trafficking, slave trade. Like all these possibilities, cunning and deceitful individuals will have sunk their teeth and claws into people who frankly we can do without. That is why we have been subliminally programmed to believe, quote, well, those things are just going to happen and there's nothing we can do about it. This is the media doing its job. The media bankrolled by the above mentioned. Repeal the tax law, abolish negative gearing, abolish the 50% capital gains tax discount. This just makes sense. Let's be gone with it. The argument is this will affect middle-income property investors. However, any negative impact this will have will be far outweighed by the positive impact of house and rent prices stabilising. Back to the framing. Shelter should not be given tax concessions for investors and speculators. Families are now homeless. This is inexcusable. Growing pains. Immigration funds the tertiary education system. This is a house of cards. The cut in immigration, therefore funding, would force the unis to recentre, retaining their essential degrees and dissolving others less so. Universities will be affected from no international intake. So be it. After all, it is the University of Sydney, the University of Melbourne, etc., not the University of Mumbai. Again, at some point you will have to stop running and take a stand. Either you, your children, or your grandchildren. Better you than them. Society grows great when men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. One day or day one, you decide. The growing pains. Universities, property investors, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, bankers, property developers all miss out on extra gouging profits. This is tough luck or tough titties. The bigger problem, if it is not addressed in the short to medium term, I can go into this in another video, but some of the conditions we saw in post-World War I Germany are already here. Unemployment, inflation, poverty, long lines in the food banks, famine, homelessness, drug addiction, gambling, prostitution, degeneracy. This is only to get worse. What can you do? If you found this video interesting, share this with a friend or family member. Again, knowing is half the battle. Interact and comment below. I'd be happy to have a chat. Remember, you don't have to be an expert. I understand you all have other things keeping you busy in your own life, but this fact is a contributing factor, allowing issues to continue to go unaddressed and compounding on itself. Familiarise yourself with preferential voting, understand how that works here in Australia. When it comes to state elections, the date varies in the 2025 federal election. Vote for those that want to see similar changes to you. There's a website here you can follow that up on. Other than that, guys, I've rambled a bit too much now, just under an hour. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to that, and let me know what you thought. Cheers.